My name is Emily Carter. I'm 36 years old, and maybe you know what it's like to be the one your family overlooks. The daughter who sets the table while her brother makes the toasts. The one they laugh at when you walk into the room as if your worth could never measure up. For years I kept my head down, smiled when it hurt, carried trays like that was all I was meant for. But that Christmas night, one careless insult changed everything. The house that silenced me for decades would finally hear the truth it never saw coming. The Newark cold bit through my coat as I stepped out of the cab. On the surface, it was just a plain wool coat. But beneath it, I wore a black dress that could have walked straight off a magazine cover. They wouldn't know. They never did. My family never cared about the things I kept hidden, only the roles they assigned me. The Carter house glowed under strings of Christmas lights, a little uneven like everything else about this family. From the porch, I could smell roasted ham buttery rolls and the thick sweetness of pie. Familiar, heavy, the same holiday scents that had clung to my childhood like chains. I hesitated for a breath staring at the wreath, then pushed open the door. Warmth and laughter burst out thick as smoke. "Emily, get some extra plates. Would you?" My mother's voice rang before I even had time to hang my coat. No greeting, no smile. Just an order. Sharp, automatic. I slipped my coat over the banister and stepped inside. The living room was crowded with faces, some family, some not. Reverend Miller perched near the fire, nodding solemnly. The Whitmans' wealthy business contacts of Daniel sat comfortably near the head of the table, their laughter loud. And Linda Brown, the neighbor who never missed a story, stood near the dessert tray, phone in hand, ready to capture tonight's gossip. I barely set down my bag when a heavy tray pressed against my palms. Daniel. He stood immaculate in a navy suit. His hair slicked, his smile wide enough for the Whitmans to see. He looked at me like a teacher looks at a tardy student disappointed, expecting nothing. "Take that to the table," he said, nodding toward the dining room. Not a hello, not even my name, just a command. The weight almost tipped me forward. I bit my cheek, said nothing, and walked carefully past the guests. Their eyes slid over me, not as Emily, not as a daughter, but as another pair of hands carrying food. The long dining table glittered under the chandelier, every plate and fork shining. I placed the tray down, steady, silent. The ham glistened. The mashed potatoes steamed, all of it arranged like a photo spread. Then Daniel's voice cut through the chatter. "She's good for cleaning," he announced loud enough for the Whitmans. A pause then with a grin. Nothing else. Forks froze mid-air. A few heads turned toward me, then quickly away as if my humiliation were too awkward to look at. Then the chuckles started, one here, another there, until laughter spread like spilled wine across the table. Heat climbed my face. I stood still, tray empty in my hands, as if his words had turned me into exactly what he claimed the help. Out of the corner of my eye, Linda Brown lowered her phone, a little smile curling her lips. She'd caught it. Not directly, but I knew Linda, she lived for stories like this. By morning, the whole neighborhood would know. I swallowed hard, forcing it down where it couldn't show. My eyes flicked to Reverend Miller. He gave Daniel a polite nod, proud of his wit. The Whitmans clapped him on the back like he'd just told the joke of the evening. I stepped aside, setting the tray carefully on the buffet. "But it didn't end there, Mrs." Whitman waved her glass at me without looking up. "More wine, please," her husband added, "and another plate of ham while you're at it." Their voices didn't even aim at me, more like calling a waiter across the room. I poured careful, steady. Neither of them said thank you. When I turned to leave, Daniel's hand clapped my shoulder, heavy, deliberate. "Some people just never reach their potential," he said with a smirk loud enough for the whole table. This time the laughter was louder. Rachel leaned against him, laughing harder than the joke deserved. My mother dabbed at her eyes, glowing with pride. And me, I smiled. Small, practiced. The kind of smile that hid more than it showed. Inside, something shifted. They thought they knew me. Thought I'd bow my head, shuffle back to the kitchen, accept the role they'd written for me. But not anymore. I glanced at Daniel, his grin wide, his glass raised. Let him toast. Let them laugh. They didn't know the truth, because one day soon the picture would change, and when it did, none of them would see it coming. The laughter from the dining room carried through the walls, muffled yet sharp enough to pierce. I stood in the kitchen balancing another tray and felt the same ache I'd carried every Christmas. The script never changed. Daniel sat in the center, the golden sun, while I stayed in the wings ferrying food, polishing silver clearing plates no one else touched. That night was no different. Steam from the dishes fogged my glasses. Heat stung my palms, and the sound of their cheer pressed down on me like a weight. I'd told myself I was used to it. But the truth? Each laugh is still cut. It hadn't started tonight. It started years ago. I was 17 when the first crack formed. That winter I came home with the letter I thought would change everything, a full scholarship to a university in New York. The envelope burned in my hands, heavy with promise. I burst into the living room, cheeks red from the cold, ready to tell them. Ready to see pride. Instead, I walked into a celebration I hadn't been invited to. My father stood tall, glass raised high. To Daniel he announced proudly, his voice booming. Our star athlete, state champion. My mother's laughter rang like bells, her eyes glowing as she looked at him. Daniel grinned, soaking it in like sunlight. I froze in the doorway, the letter trembling between my fingers. I got in, I whispered, but no one turned. My mother brushed past me to refill Daniel's plate. My father clapped him on the shoulder. This is the kind of achievement that matters. The words landed harder than any silence. Later in my room, I folded the scholarship letter neatly and slid it into my desk drawer. Paper that had felt like gold was invisible in that house. That was the first time I learned what my victories were worth. Nothing. It didn't stop there. At 21, I came home from college with straight A's and news that I'd been offered a research assistantship. I barely got the words out before my father turned to the guests and said, "Daniel just made varsity captain." My mother beamed, pressing another gift into his hands. Someone gave me a stack of dish towels. Year after year, the script repeated. Daniel got the applause, the cars, the toasts. I got silence, or worse, pity. Sometimes I wondered if I was even their daughter or just the extra set of hands to keep the house running. Now in the present, I carried another tray into the dining room. The Whitmans leaned forward, hanging on Daniel's every word. Reverend Miller chuckled along his approval, thick as honey. My father Thomas sat proudly at the head of the table. My mother Margaret laughed that high, delighted laugh she reserved only for Daniel's triumphs. I set the tray down carefully, sliding each plate into place. Daniel didn't look my way. He never did. But my father did, just long enough to gesture toward Daniel. "You know," he said to the guests, his voice carrying, "Daniel has had that drive since high school. We always knew he would be the one to make something of himself." Margaret leaned in, adding sweetly, "It's true. We gave both children the same start, but Daniel knew how to seize the opportunities." The words hung heavy. A compliment dressed like a knife. Daniel succeeded because he deserved it. And me, I had failed. My smile stayed tight, though my hands curled against the tray. The diamonds on my mother's bracelet caught the light as she waved toward Daniel, her face glowing with pride. My father poured more wine, speaking of his son, as though no one else existed at the table. Then came the question. Mr. Whitman's eyes flicked to me, polite but probing. "And what about you, Emily? What do you do now?" The table was still. Forks paused. A spotlight I hadn't asked for burned on me. I swallowed, forcing my voice even. "I keep myself busy." I placed another glass down carefully, as though that was all I was built for. The guests chuckled politely, hearing in my restraint the answer they wanted, that I was small, that Daniel's shadow was where I belonged. My father cleared his throat, rushing to fill the silence. "Well, Daniel just closed a major deal last month. Bright future ahead." The conversation swept back to him like water rushing downhill. But across the table, Linda Brown was watching me. Her phone rested in her lap, her sharp eyes following every detail. Linda collected stories the way other women collected jewelry, and she had just found a new one. The smell of roasted ham filled the air as my father raised another toast. To Daniel, he said, voice booming once more. Glasses clinked. Laughter spilled, and again I was invisible. But I wasn't 17 anymore. I stepped back from the table, leaning against the doorway. My breath came slow and steady, though inside I felt the old ache stirring, mixing with something sharper. Daniel caught my eye from across the room, his smile smug, certain of his place and mine. The same smile he had given me when my scholarship letter went unread. For a moment, the years collapsed. I was back in that living room at 17, holding a folded letter no one cared about. But I wasn't the same girl. I had learned patience, I had learned endurance, and I had learned to wait for the right moment. I picked up the empty tray, my expression calm. My mother's laughter rang again, sharp as crystal. My father boasted about another of Daniel's almost deals. The Whitmans applauded politely. No one noticed when I slipped back into the kitchen. They thought the past had taught me submission, but all it had taught me was how to endure long enough to choose the moment that mattered. I pressed the tray onto the counter, the metal cool against my palms. My eyes flicked to my phone hidden in my pocket. Tonight it held contracts, deals, power my family couldn't imagine. The modern version of that first ignored letter. They had silenced me once. They had ignored the first paper that could have changed my life. This time they wouldn't be able to ignore the next one. The wine glistened red under the Christmas lights, catching on crystal glasses as they were lifted and lowered again. The long dining table looked like something from a glossy magazine spread, silver candlesticks, glowing evergreen garlands wound through polished crystal dishes, steaming under the golden chandelier. But the warmth was a facade. Underneath it all, the tension clung to me like smoke. I carried another platter to the table, careful not to spill, when Daniel's voice rose above the hum of chatter. He didn't need a microphone. He never did. His tone filled every corner of the room like a preacher who expected silence, and silence was what he got. Carter Builders completed one of the largest housing developments in this city, he declared, puffing his chest out with pride. The newspapers called me a rising star, one of New Jersey's most promising young entrepreneurs. A ripple of approval moved through the guests. Heads nodded. Glasses lifted in salute. The Whitmans leaned forward with interest, eager to bask in reflected success. Reverend Miller clasped his hands as though Daniel's speech were scripture. I set the vegetables down, the steam fogging my glasses for a moment, and tried to steady my breathing. Rachel, wrapped in her red satin dress, leaned into him. "He's always been successful," she said sweetly. Then her smile shifted just enough for the jab to cut. Not like some people who only ever seem to tidy up in the kitchen. Her jeweled bracelet glinted as her hand brushed his sleeve, a gesture as staged as her words. The laughter was soft at first, but it spread. I felt the weight of every glance, some pitying, others quick and dismissive. My jaw tightened, but my face stayed smooth. My father lifted his glass. His cheeks flushed. "That's right. Daniel has always been the pride of this family. Your mother and I knew he'd go far." Margaret added, her voice honeyed and sharp at once. "We gave both children the same start, but Daniel knew how to seize opportunities." Their words dressed up as compliments, but each one sliced at me. To the table, it was admiration. To me, it was a dismissal. Then Daniel's grin widened. He leaned back in his chair, stretching out like a king in his court. "You know," he said, turning his head deliberately toward me while Emily was folding napkins at Christmas dinners, "I was cutting ribbons at new developments." The guests laughed louder, encouraged now that Daniel himself had made me the punchline. Rachel clinked her glass against his. My mother dabbed at the corners of her eyes, overcome with pride. And then, almost casually, Mr. Whitman turned his gaze to me. "And what about you, Emily? What are you doing now?" His voice was polite, but the question was a knife sharp in public. The entire table stilled, waiting for me to answer. I swallowed. My tray still hung heavy in my hands. For a moment I was 17 again, standing in this same house with a scholarship letter clutched in my fingers while no one cared to listen. Back then I had whispered, I got into a room that never turned its head. Tonight felt the same, every eye on me, but not with pride. With judgment. I forced my lips into a practiced smile. "I keep myself busy," I said softly, setting the tray down with care. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. And they laughed again, hearing in my restraint the confirmation they wanted that I was small, that Daniel's comparison was fair. Inside, something coiled tight. None of them saw the truth behind his words. Carter Builders was drowning its debts stacked higher than its projects. The empire he bragged about was already crumbling, held together with empty promises. But they didn't know. They couldn't imagine that the fund he bragged about securing was mine, that the rejection letter waiting on his desk carried my signature. Daniel clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder loud enough to draw attention again. Some people, he said, his voice booming over the table, just never reached their potential. The room erupted. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed. Rachel leaned closer to him in triumph. I smiled, but my teeth pressed hard together. My fingers dug into the tray until my knuckles turned white. They thought they were laughing at my expense. They thought I was shrinking again like that 17-year-old girl with the letter no one read. But they were wrong, because this time, I wasn't the forgotten one. I was the one holding the strings. I stepped back slowly, the noise of their laughter rolling over me like a storm I no longer feared. Linda Brown lifted her phone for a discreet picture, her sharp eyes flicking to me as if she knew there was more to this story. Let them celebrate Daniel. Let them toast his fading glory. I could wait. The moment was coming when their glasses would fall silent, when every smile would freeze, when the only taste in their mouths would be shock. And as I slipped quietly back toward the kitchen, Daniel's voice booming behind me, I knew the fall would be harder than he could ever imagine. Daniel's laughter still echoed from the living room as I stepped into the kitchen. My hands were red from the heat of trays, the skin damp from steam. I dried them quickly, then felt the faint vibration in my pocket. One message. From Sarah, my lawyer, my confidant. San Francisco deal closed. 120M secured. I stared at the screen, breath caught. For a heartbeat, the noise outside disappeared. No clinking glasses, no chatter, no Daniel's voice. Only those words. 120 million. I slipped the phone away, straightened, and reached for the dessert tray. A mountain of frosted cookies, slices of pie, a gingerbread cake so heavy the platter dipped in the center. My face calm, my steps steady, I carried it back to the dining room. The room glowed under the chandelier. The Whitmans leaned close to my father, whispering in low tones. Reverend Miller chuckled softly at something Rachel said. Daniel's hands carved the air as if the room itself existed only to applaud him. I moved quietly among them, setting plates down. A slice here, a cup of coffee there. More wine, Mrs. Whitman said, not looking at me. She lifted her glass slightly, her eyes still fixed on Daniel. Her husband added, and a plate of ham, please, waving his hand in my direction like shooting a fly. I poured, careful not to spill. Neither of them said thank you. Rachel reached for a fork, her diamonds catching the light. I placed a dish near her. She leaned closer to Daniel, laughed, then lifted her hand just enough to block her face from mine, as if I weren't family, only background noise. Something pricked sharp under my ribs, but I kept my smile fixed. Then I felt it. A gaze. At the far end of the table, Linda Brown wasn't laughing. Her plate sat untouched. Her phone rested face down beside her glass. Her eyes were on me. I shifted the tray in my hands. My sleeve slipped back. The watch glimmered under the light. A Rolex, date just. Stainless steel, champagne dial. A gift to myself when I closed the London deal 3 years ago, the deal that had brought my firm nearly 50 million. To me, it was just a reminder of what I had built. To Linda, it was a question. Her eyes narrowed, her head tilted. 1 second. That was all. Suspicion. Recognition. Then she looked down, pretending not to notice, but I knew better. She always noticed. She collected details like pearls, stringing them into stories for the whole neighborhood to hear. I slid my sleeve down, covering the watch, and turned toward the dessert table. My heart was steady now, not racing. The secret wasn't slipping, it was surfacing. Behind me, Daniel launched into another story, this time about a trip to Miami, his voice rich with self-importance. My father leaned in, nodding. Margaret clapped her hands together, soft and delicate, as though her son had just delivered a sermon. No one here knew that while Daniel spun illusions, a contract across the country was drying. My contract, my deal, my signature. The Rolex gleamed faintly as I tightened the strap. Linda's glance replayed in my mind. But instead of fear, I felt something sharper. The mask was slipping. I set the last plate down, my smile polite, my head lowered just enough to keep them comfortable. They toasted Daniel again, voices rising in admiration. But beneath the noise, the truth pulsed steady. They haven't seen it yet, but one day soon they would. The rhythm of forks against plates kept time like background music. Glasses clinked, chairs shifted, and laughter rose and fell in rehearsed waves. Then Daniel stood. His suit caught the light, his smile wide and commanding. He didn't just rise to speak, he claimed the room the way he always did, as though the spotlight belonged to him by birthright. I stood near the far end, a tray balanced in my hands. To them, I wasn't part of the conversation. I was in the scenery. But my eyes stayed on Daniel. Carter Builders has never been stronger, he began, his voice smooth rolling like a practiced speech. We just signed new contracts. Big ones. Developers are lining up. They're calling us the safest bet in New Jersey construction. Murmurs of approval circled the table. The Whitmans nodded, eager to be seen connected to a man who sounded so sure. Reverend Miller lifted his glass halfway, then paused, waiting for the right moment to toast. The words dripped confidence. But I knew the truth. Invoices unpaid. Banks circling. That so-called safest bet was already marked red on more than one ledger. Still, he kept going. And this dinner, this family is the reason I've been able to build what I've built. Support, encouragement, values passed down. He gestured grandly toward our parents. Margaret glowing at his side. Thomas lifting his chin with pride. Then his eyes flicked to me. His hand swept outward casually, dismissive as if brushing dust off a shelf. Of course, every family needs balance, he said lightly. Some of us lead, and some contribute in other ways. My sister Emily helps keep things running tonight. Don't mind her. The line landed sharper than if he'd shouted. Laughter rippled, quick and uneasy. A couple of guests glanced toward me, then back at their plates as though embarrassed to have even looked. My grip tightened on the tray. I stepped forward, setting a glass gently by Mrs. Whitman's elbow. She didn't acknowledge me. Instead, she leaned closer to Daniel, her smile wide, asking, "And how soon will these contracts show results?" Daniel seized it, his voice swelling. Soon. Very soon. Next quarter, you'll see headlines. New jobs, expansion. We'll be setting the pace for the whole state. I caught the small flicker in Mr. Whitman's eyes, a narrowing, a subtle twitch of skepticism. He sipped his wine slowly, not clapping this time. Rachel, perfect as ever in her red dress, leaned into Daniel's side. That's why I trust him, she said warmly. He always makes good on his word. I almost laughed. His word was air slipping through fingers. But in this room, they ate it like bread. My father raised his glass voice, booming. To Daniel. To the future of Carter Builders. To the legacy of this family. Chairs scraped as guests lifted glasses. The toast rang hollow, but still it filled the room. I moved closer to refill a wine glass. Daniel's gaze snapped to mine. Our eyes locked. His smile faltered just enough for me to see the warning behind it. Don't you dare. Don't ruin this. The tray didn't shake in my hands. I lowered my head as though obedient, as though playing the role he wanted. To anyone else, I looked subdued. A sister who had long accepted her place. But beneath the bow of my head, my thoughts burned steady. He was terrified. Not of me spilling wine, but of me spilling truth. I placed the glass, carefully stepped back, and leaned against the wall near the doorway. From there, I could see everything. Daniel's arms spreading wide, Rachel's fingers brushing his sleeve, our parents beaming, the Whitmans trading quick looks of calculation. Reverend Miller's chuckle rang thin-forced. And Linda Brown, oh, Linda. She sat with her phone in her lap, her eyes darting between me and Daniel. Her lips curled ever so slightly, like she'd already drafted the headline in her mind. Daniel raised his glass, higher voice booming. This is just the beginning. With a family like mine, he glanced toward our parents, deliberately skipping over me. There's no limit to how far we'll go. Applause again. But I heard the difference. Quieter. More restrained. A beat too long before hands met in claps. Daniel didn't notice. He never did. He basked blind, certain the room was his. But from where I stood, I could see the cracks. Mr. Whitman's stiff smile. Linda's knowing eyes. The faintest shift of unease crawling along the table. Every exaggerated word he spoke was another stone stacked on a wall too thin to hold. I folded my arms, waited, watched. This wasn't a triumph. This was scaffolding around a collapsing house, and soon the whole room would see it. The laughter outside kept rising and falling, a steady tide of clinking glasses and polished compliments. In the kitchen, though, the air was heavy. The counters gleamed under the yellow light stacked with dishes and trays, but all I could hear was the hiss of hot water as I rinsed another plate. Steam curled around my hands, leaving my skin raw and red. The door creaked open behind me. I didn't need to turn to know it wasn't Daniel. His steps were too light, hesitant. Emily. Michael's voice was softer than I remembered. I looked over my shoulder. He stood there awkwardly, holding a plate he didn't need to bring in. His face carried that familiar mixture of kindness and restraint, as though he'd spent a lifetime biting back words. He set the plate down beside me. For a moment, we worked in silence. Then he spoke again, quieter this time, almost like a confession. "You don't deserve this. Any of it." My hands paused mid-rinse. The faucet hissed between us. I turned slightly, meeting his gaze. "Michael." I tried to keep my voice, even a small smile pressed on my lips. "You don't have to worry. I'm used to it." His jaw tightened. "That's the problem. You shouldn't be." The sincerity in his eyes startled me more than I cared to admit. Michael had always been the quiet one, the peacemaker, the shadow in Daniel's storm. But tonight there was something different in him, a sharpness, a frustration he rarely allowed out. He studied me for a beat, then added, "You're hiding something. I can see it." I dried my hands on a towel, buying myself a second. I wanted to laugh to brush it off, but his stare made that impossible. "Maybe I'm just tired," I said lightly, stacking the plates. He shook his head. "No, it's more than that. You carry yourself differently. Even when they—" He trailed off, glancing toward the door as if afraid someone might overhear. "Even when they treat you like this, you don't bend. Not the way they think." I turned back to the dishes, forcing calm into my movements. The truth pressed at the edges of my tongue, begging to be freed. To tell Michael that I wasn't the woman they pitied, that the empire they envied belonged to me. That I could change his life in one phone call. But not yet. Not here. Not in this cramped kitchen with the laughter of Daniel's lies echoing just beyond the door. "Michael," I said softly, wiping the last glass, "you don't know everything about me." His brow furrowed. "Then tell me." I let out a small laugh, more bitter than amused. "One day." The moment hung between us, fragile and charged, and then my pocket buzzed. I pulled the phone out, shielding the screen with my hand. One new message. From Robert. "The car is ready. Jet-fueled at Teterboro. Just waiting for your word." My breath caught. For weeks I had planned this night down to the last detail. And now the first signal was here. The car idling the jet, waiting under winter skies. My exit path. My reveal, everything was falling into place. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, the weight of it grounding me. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face calm. Michael was still watching me. "What was that?" "Nothing," I said quickly. Too quickly. His eyes narrowed, but before he could press further, the door swung open. Daniel stormed in, the mask of charm stripped from his face. His smile, so polished for the guests, was gone. What remained was sharp, irritated, impatient. "There you are." His voice cut through the room. "Why are you wasting time? Dessert needs to be out. Now." I turned slowly, towel in hand, meeting his glare. He didn't look at Michael. He didn't care that his younger brother stood there. In this room, in this moment, he only saw me as the maid he had sculpted out of family expectation. Don't keep them waiting, he snapped already, pivoting back toward the door. Do your job. The words landed like a command to a servant stripped of warmth or recognition. I placed the towel neatly on the counter, lifted the tray of desserts, and straightened my back. Daniel didn't notice the way my grip steadied, or how the corner of my mouth curved, not in defeat but in resolve. Michael opened his mouth, but I shook my head, silencing him. Not yet. Because in my hands, I wasn't just carrying a tray of sweets. I was carrying the final pieces of a game only I knew was being played. I stepped past Daniel, my face calm, my steps steady. The sound of laughter from the dining room grew louder as I pushed the door open. Behind me, Michael's voice followed, soft but certain. You're not what they think you are. I didn't look back, because he was right. And soon enough the rest of them would see it too. The moment I stepped back into the dining room with the dessert tray, the atmosphere had shifted. The chandelier blazed above the polished table, the guests leaned in their laughter sharp and bright. And there was Daniel standing once more with his glass raised, soaking in the glow, as if the room existed for him alone. This is just the beginning, he announced, his voice smooth, practiced, confident. Carter Builders isn't just about houses. We're building a legacy. A family name that will stand tall for generations. When people talk about the Carters, they'll talk about strength, vision, and success. Applause rippled politely. Not the roaring kind, not the kind he imagined, but enough. Daniel's grin widened anyway. Rachel reached up and touched his arm like a first lady at a coronation. Her diamond bracelet flashed as she leaned into him. Daniel has always seen further than the rest of us. He doesn't settle for small things. Then her eyes cut toward me, the smile sharpening. Not like some people who seem perfectly content just wiping tables. The laugh that followed was rehearsed, but it caught. A ripple spread, a couple of chuckles here, a murmur there. I placed the tray at the end of the table, each plate landing with careful precision. The cookies, the gingerbread cake, the pies. My hands were steady, my face calm. But inside, the words burned. Daniel caught the reaction, saw the chuckles, and leaned in to press his advantage. That's the difference between vision and failure, he said, gesturing toward me without looking directly. Not everyone is built for success. Some people, well, their contribution tonight speaks for itself. He pointed to the desserts to the tray I had just set down, and the table burst into louder laughter. The sound filled every corner. Rachel tilted her head back, laughing harder than the joke deserved. Reverend Miller gave a polite chuckle, more out of habit than amusement. The Whitmans smiled, tightly trapped between courtesy and discomfort. And Linda Brown, always alert, raised her phone just slightly, as though adjusting it, her eyes flicking between Daniel and me, storing the scene for later. I stood still, a pitcher of water in my hand. My mother's eyes slid toward me, heavy with that mixture of disappointment and disdain she had perfected over the years. Her sigh cut through the room. Emily, she said, her tone slow, deliberate. If only you had been more like your brother. You might have had a place in the company by now. The silence that followed was thicker than the laughter. Guests shifted in their seats. Some lowered their eyes, others sipped from their glasses to avoid the tension. My father Thomas lifted his own glass, breaking it with a booming toast. To Daniel, he declared proudly, "The one who carries our family forward." The chorus rose again. Glasses clinked, laughter returned, voices overlapped. But in that brief pause, I had seen it the moment my mother's words landed, the moment her dismissal cut across me like a cold wind, and I had felt the ache stir old and familiar. I swallowed it down as I always had. My lips pressed into the faintest smile. Silence was easier than protest. Silence was safer. And in silence, I could wait. Daniel seized the energy again, raising his glass higher. Success isn't just about money. It's about legacy. About knowing your name will outlast you. That's what I'm building. That's what Carter Builders is. That's what the Carters stand for. He let the words linger, hanging them like banners across the table. Guests nodded politely. My mother dabbed at her eyes as if moved by his vision. Rachel squeezed his hand under the table, her smile radiant with borrowed pride. My father leaned back, satisfied, as though the world had just confirmed what he always believed, that Daniel was the chosen one. Meanwhile, I poured another glass of water. Mrs. Whitman accepted it without meeting my eyes. Her husband gave me a small nod, quick and apologetic, as though embarrassed by the spectacle but unwilling to challenge it. Reverend Miller cleared his throat but said nothing, and Linda Brown kept watching her phone, now tilted the faint glow of its screen, catching the edge of her glass. Daniel's laughter rolled through the room again. "The future is bright," he declared, "for those who know how to seize it." Rachel raised her glass. "And for those who don't, well, let's just say not everyone is meant to carry the Carter name." More laughter. More clinking. The sound swelled and broke around me like a wave, drowning out the quiet that lived under my skin. My mother's eyes settled on me once more, a mixture of pity and scorn. My father didn't even look my way. I placed the pitcher back on the sideboard, letting the weight of it go. My hands folded neatly in front of me. I kept my face composed, but my gaze fixed on Daniel. He thought he was standing at the peak of the mountain, admired, envied, untouchable. He thought tonight was proof of his legacy. But I knew better. I could see the cracks in the facade, the brittleness in the applause, the unease hiding behind polite smiles. And I knew what they didn't, that the empire he bragged about was already crumbling, that the legacy he claimed was built on sand. I stood there still as a shadow, letting their laughter wash over me. They thought they were laughing at my expense. They thought silence meant defeat. But silence was my weapon. Silence was patience. Silence was the stage before the fall. And as Daniel lifted his glass once more, basking in the glow of a future he would never own, I knew the moment was drawing closer, closer than he could ever imagine. The living room glowed warmer as the night went on. Candles flickered along the mantel. The piano hummed a slow carol, and voices joined softly in the background. For everyone else, it must have felt like Christmas magic. For me, it was only a stage, bright lights covering shadows they refused to see. I carried a tray of small cakes into the room, moving carefully between chairs, my smile fixed and practiced. Every step was a reminder of the role they expected me to play. Hands that once signed contracts worth millions now balanced porcelain plates like I was part of the staff. "Family is strength," Reverend Miller said suddenly, his deep voice rising above the music. He stood, lifting his glass with solemn dignity. "Wealth means nothing if we cannot sit together on Christmas night. We are rich when we honor one another." Polite applause followed. Heads nodded. To them his words were uplifting. To me they cut like glass. I almost laughed at the irony. If only he knew what honoring one another really looked like in this house. Before the echo of his toast faded, Daniel rose from his chair, swagger in every movement. His smile stretched wide as he reached for the tray in my hands. He yanked it without warning, forcing me to steady myself. "See," he called out loud enough for the neighbors 2 blocks away to hear. "She's perfect at this. Serving food, cleaning dishes. That's her contribution to the family." The room froze, then broke into uneasy chuckles. A few people looked down into their glasses, embarrassed, but no one spoke up. The laughter was easier, safer. Heat burned at the back of my neck. My jaw clenched, but my lips stayed curled in the faintest smile. I'd trained myself for this, how to stand still while every word hit like a stone. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Linda Brown. She leaned back in her chair, sliding her phone from her purse with quiet precision. Her thumb tapped the screen, and the glow of the camera reflected briefly in her glasses. She wasn't laughing. She was recording. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Every humiliation I had swallowed, every moment they thought went unnoticed, someone was finally capturing it. I placed the tray gently on the table, each movement deliberate, as if I hadn't seen Linda's lens fixed on me. My smile didn't falter. It couldn't. Daniel, emboldened by the ripple of laughter, raised his glass higher. "Not everyone is made for success," he declared, sweeping his arm across the table. "Some are born to serve, and we should be grateful when they accept their place." The laughter came again, sharper this time, bouncing off the walls. I heard forks clatter against plates, the sound jagged in my ears. Inside, something twisted hard. I bit down so hard my teeth scraped my lip, but I forced the taste of blood back with a smile that felt carved into my face. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. But Linda saw. I caught the way her eyebrows lifted, the little smirk tugging at her mouth. She glanced down at her phone, thumbs flying quickly over the screen. In that instant, I knew she had sent the video. Not just recorded it. Send it. The whispers began almost immediately. At first, just a murmur at the far end of the table. Then another. People shifting uncomfortably, side glances bouncing between me and Daniel. They didn't know why, but something had changed. And I stood there still and silent, letting the noise of their discomfort grow. Daniel didn't notice. He laughed louder, filling the air with his arrogance. "She's just a maid," he said, as if the words were a punchline. His voice cracked with triumph, blind to the shift around him. I picked up an empty tray, my hands steady now. The mask of obedience still fixed on my face, but behind it the weight in my chest lifted just a little. Linda had lit the first match. As I turned toward the kitchen, the whispers followed me. The scrape of a chair. The nervous laugh of someone who wasn't sure anymore whether it was safe to join in Daniel's joke. I pushed through the swinging door, the sound of their laughter still chasing me down the hallway. But I carried something new now. No shame, not silence, evidence. For years, my humiliation had been contained within these walls. Tonight it slipped out, and once out there would be no calling it back. I set the tray down on the counter, pressing my palms flat against the cool surface to steady myself. In the distance, I could still hear Daniel's voice booming, desperate to keep the spotlight. He thought the night belonged to him. He thought the applause was real. But I knew better. Every second that passed was carrying me closer to the moment when his laughter would die in his throat, when the same room that echoed with his pride would choke on its own silence. The sound of laughter carried into the kitchen like waves crashing against stone. I stood there alone, dish towel in hand, staring at a small crack in the white tile wall. It was barely noticeable, hidden behind the spice rack, but I saw it every time I stood in this spot. For years I felt like that crack, present, part of the house, but unseen. No one cared if it spread. I stacked another plate on the counter, the porcelain clink sharp in the silence. Then I heard his voice float in from the dining room, Daniel's laugh booming, confident, rolling over the guests like he was king of the world. "She'll always be a maid," he said. Nothing more. The words weren't aimed at me directly, but they sliced through the door, found me standing in the kitchen and lodged deep. The guests laughed with him, their voices blending into one harsh chorus. My grip on the towel tightened. My breath came short. He thought I couldn't hear. He thought those walls would protect me from his words. But I heard every syllable, and they rang louder than the music in the background. Just then, my phone buzzed against the counter. I wiped my damp hands quickly and picked it up. One new message from Sarah. 6 words. Simple. Final. "The rejection letter has been signed." I blinked, staring at the glow of the screen. My pulse quickened, pounding in my ears. That letter wasn't just paper. It was a door slamming shut. At the end of the deal, Daniel had been parading around the table, the one thing keeping his image intact. And the signature at the bottom, the one that sealed his fate, was mine. I pressed the phone to my chest for a second, closing my eyes. The irony almost made me laugh. While he bragged about building an empire, I had quietly signed the paper that toppled it. My hands shook as I set the phone down. I looked up, catching sight of myself in the small mirror nailed to the kitchen wall. For years I avoided that mirror. Tonight I didn't. The face staring back wasn't the girl who once begged for recognition. My hair was pulled back loosely, wisps falling out after hours of serving. My cheeks flushed from heat and work. My eyes were steady. Sharper. Older, yes, but lined with something stronger. "Enough," I whispered to the reflection. The word barely left my lips, but it reverberated inside me. I straightened shoulders, squaring breath coming deeper. My chest no longer felt heavy with humiliation. It felt filled with certainty. On the counter, an empty serving tray gleamed under the kitchen light. I grabbed it, held it tight, and then slammed it down. The metallic clang rang loud against the wood, echoing through the narrow space. For a moment it sounded like a gavel hitting the block. My judgment had been made. The noise startled even me, but it steadied my resolve. No more hiding. No more silence. Through the doorway I could still hear Daniel. His voice rose higher, animated, full of self-importance. He was weaving fantasies for the guests, spinning stories about growth and expansion, promising futures that didn't exist. And they listened, even as doubt crept into their laughter. I pulled the towel from my hands and laid it neatly on the counter. My palms were raw from the hot water, but they felt powerful now, not weak. This house had been my cage for so long. Tonight it will become my stage. I turned back to the mirror one last time. The woman staring back wasn't invisible anymore. She was the one holding the truth, the one who had already decided how the story would end. I whispered again, firmer this time. Enough. I lifted the tray, balanced it effortlessly, and took a step toward the swinging door that led back into the dining room. My pulse pounded, but it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. The laughter outside reached another peak, the perfect backdrop for what was about to happen. Daniel thought he had silenced me with years of commands, taunts, and lies. He thought I'd remain in the kitchen forever. He was wrong. I pushed the door with my shoulder. The sound of my footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor as I stepped back toward the light of the dining room. This time I wasn't walking in to serve. I was walking in to end the performance. I stepped out of the kitchen with no tray in my hands, no polite bow of the head, no shadow of submission left on my face. For the first time that evening, I wasn't carrying their weight. I wasn't holding their laughter on my shoulders. I was just standing there in the open, letting every eye fall on me. Daniel was the first to notice. His brow arched, his lips curling into the smirk I had seen all my life. It wasn't just amusement. It was ownership. The kind of smile that told me he thought he knew how this story would end. Me embarrassed him triumphant. I took a slow breath, my voice steady as I spoke. "Excuse me," I said loud enough for every guest to hear. "I'll have to leave early tonight. I have an important appointment." For a second, silence held. Then the wave of laughter broke. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her jeweled bracelet glinting under the chandelier. "A meeting at Christmas dinner." Her voice was sharp, dripping with mockery. "How very professional of you, Emily." Daniel didn't miss a beat. He leaned forward, resting one hand on the table, raising his glass with the other. "A meeting," his laughter roared, carrying over the table. "At this hour. What is it, Emily? The night shift at a diner? Or maybe scrubbing floors for tips?" The guests joined in chuckles first, then louder bursts. A few tried to cover their mouths, feigning politeness, but it was too late. The sound spread like fire. Laughter. At me. Always at me. I stood still, letting it crash around me. Every year I had endured this different form, same result. Tonight, though, my smile didn't falter. I let the corners of my mouth lift slow and deliberate, a smile he couldn't read. Daniel tilted his head, clearly confused by my composure. He lifted his glass higher. "See?" he said, voice booming again. "She'll always be the maid." Nothing more. The laughter swelled. Chairs scraped. Glasses clinked. For a moment it felt like the entire house pulsed with mockery. And then the doorbell rang. Clear, sharp, cutting through the noise like a strike of lightning. The sound hung in the air, freezing the room mid-laugh. A few guests glanced at each other, uncertain. The Whitmans turned their heads toward the hallway. Reverend Miller paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. Even the children fell silent. Daniel lowered his glass slowly, his brow furrowed. He looked annoyed, as though the sound itself had dared to interrupt his performance. The doorbell rang again. My pulse quickened. It wasn't fear this time. It was anticipation. "Margaret," my mother pushed her chair back with a huff. "Who on earth?" she muttered, but before she could rise, the front door opened. And there he was. Robert stepped inside, tall, composed, every inch of him polished in his black suit. His shoes gleamed against the hardwood floor, his tie perfectly knotted. He looked like he had stepped out of a boardroom, not into a suburban living room. His eyes scanned the room once and then settled on me. "Madame," he said, his voice clear, steady, unshaken by the sea of stunned faces. "Your private jet is ready." The words landed with the weight of a stone dropped in still water. The ripple was immediate. Forks clattered against plates. Rachel's hand froze mid-air, her bracelet catching the light but her face drained of it. Reverend Miller blinked hard as if the sound betrayed his ears. The Whitmans exchanged quick, startled glances, their polite smiles breaking. The air shifted. Every guest who had laughed a moment before sat in silence. Now their eyes wide, their expressions stiff. The room, once roaring with noise, became a vacuum of disbelief. And Daniel's smirk faltered. His lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time, his eyes flicked with uncertainty. The swagger that had carried him all evening drained from his posture. He gripped the back of his chair a little too tight. I met his gaze and held it. Calm, steady. No words, no need for them yet. Just silence. My silence. The kind he had never known how to face. Robert stood there waiting, the perfect picture of professionalism. His presence alone split the evening in two, the world before the door opened and the world after. I felt the shift ripple through the room, through the air, through Daniel's composure. The laughter was gone. The echo of his mockery was gone. All that remained was the sound of his breathing, sharp and shallow, and the fear flickering in his eyes. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking under the weight of humiliation. He was. I turned slightly, letting my gaze rest on Daniel a moment longer. His smirk was gone now, replaced by a hollow stare. The mask had cracked, and in that hollow stare I saw it, something I had never seen before. Fear. The room had gone silent after Robert's words. Christmas music still played faintly from the speakers, but no one was humming anymore. The air had shifted thick electric, holding everyone in its grip. For the first time in years, I stood tall in that house, not bent under trays or weighed down by forced smiles. Robert moved forward with his usual precision, carrying a folder pressed neatly under his arm. Without a word, he placed it in my hands. The smooth leather felt cool against my skin. I opened it, scanning the top page, though I already knew what it said. My eyes lifted and my voice carried across the room, steady and unshaken. "This is a copy of the rejection letter Carter Builders received this afternoon." Gasps broke the silence. Mr. Whitman, who had been nodding politely all night, dropped his glass, the sharp crack of crystal shattering on the floor. My father's brow furrowed, his lips pressed tight, as though holding back disbelief. Daniel shot up from his chair, his face flushing crimson. "Lies." He shouted, his voice trembling more than he wanted it to. "Emily, what game are you playing? You think you can meddle in my business? Do you think anyone here will believe you?" I held his gaze calm against his fury. "The fund that turned you down was Carter Capital, and I am its CEO." The words struck the room like thunder. My mother gasped, her hand flying to the edge of the table as though steadying herself. The chair beneath her creaked under her sudden weight. Reverend Miller, who only minutes before had spoken of family unity, whispered a hurried prayer under his breath. Rachel stumbled back a step, her hand frozen on her necklace, her eyes wide as if I had spoken in another language. Daniel's voice cracked louder now, desperate. "No, that's impossible. You can't even manage your own life. You've been a burden since forever. You couldn't possibly run anything, let alone a company." His words rattled, falling apart even as he spoke them. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. My heels clicked softly against the hardwood, each sound deliberate. My eyes locked on his. "No one thought I could. Not you. Not father. Not mother. But while you thought I was folding napkins and wiping dishes, I was building Carter Capital into one of the strongest funds on the East Coast. Every deal you envied, every investor you chased, they came through me. And this week, it was my signature that sealed the rejection of your loan." The silence was heavier than before. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to crackle more softly, as if listening. Daniel staggered back, his bravado crumbling. He looked around the table, searching desperately for someone, anyone to back him. But there was nothing. No nods of support, No words of comfort, only wide eyes and shifting glances. My father's jaw worked, but no words came. My mother's breath hitched her chest, rising and falling too quickly, and Rachel, her hand still gripping her necklace, looked at Daniel as though she had just seen him for the first time. Daniel slammed his palm on the table. "You're lying, she's lying." But his voice lacked conviction. It trembled, frayed at the edges. Robert, calm and collected, stepped forward and laid another sheet on the table. The official seal of Carter Capital at the top. My name printed boldly beneath. Proof undeniable and final. Whispers swept through the guests. Reverend Miller shook his head, muttering, "All this time, all this time." Mr. Whitman leaned back, his face pale, muttering something about due diligence. Linda Brown, the neighbor with her ever-present phone, had her camera angled low, her fingers tapping quickly, capturing every stunned expression. My mother finally found her voice. It came soft, cracking. "How long?" "Emily," she whispered. "How long have you been?" I looked at her not with bitterness, but with a calm that came from years of waiting. "Since the day you told me I was only good at housework. That's when I started. And that's when I promised myself you'd never know until the time was right." Her eyes filled, though, whether from shame or shock I couldn't tell. Daniel lunged forward, his face twisted with desperation. "No one will believe this. You forged it. You enough." My voice cut through his panic. Clear, firm, stronger than his rage. "The truth is right there in black and white. Your lies end tonight. Not because I said so, but because the proof speaks louder than you ever could." The guests whispered louder now, voices layering one over the other. Reverend Miller sank deeper into his chair, as though ashamed to have praised Daniel so blindly. Rachel pulled her hand away from Daniel's arm, leaving him standing alone. My father turned away, unable to meet his son's eyes. Daniel stood in the center of the storm, abandoned. His face reddened, his jaw clenched tight. But his eyes betrayed him. They darted frantic, hollow with fear. And for the first time in that house, it wasn't me standing small and humiliated in the corner. It was him. I let the silence stretch, holding the room in my grasp. My shoulders were back, my head high. Not the maid. Not the forgotten daughter. Not the failure. I was the one with the truth. The one with the power. And Daniel's unraveling in front of his family and friends was only the beginning. The room was so quiet, I could hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The Christmas lights blinked on the tree, still cheerful, but the warmth had gone. My father sat frozen in his chair, lips pressed together. My mother clutched the armrest, her eyes red. Daniel stood in the middle of the room, so drained. A man stripped of the armor he had worn all his life. He had never looked smaller. I turned toward Robert, gave a slight nod, then faced the room again. My voice cut through the stillness, calm but edged with steel. Family isn't supposed to be a place where one is belittled. If you could never see my worth, then I no longer need your approval. Rachel rose quickly, her bracelet jingling against the glass she held. Her voice shook, almost pleading. "Emily, we're still family. Don't do this. We can fix it." I looked at her, letting silence stretch a moment before speaking. A family doesn't turn a daughter into a maid. The family doesn't laugh when one of their own is humiliated. And family doesn't pretend love when all they offer is contempt. She lowered her gaze, her lips pressed shut. Around her, the guests shifted uneasily, eyes darting between me and Daniel, as though waiting for someone to step in to soften the blow. Daniel finally found his voice. It cracked as he tried to shout, "You can't just walk away like this. You owe this family everything." A laugh slipped from me, sharp but brief. "If there's any debt, it's the countless dinners paid for by my money, the mortgages I covered, quietly the bills you never asked how they got settled. Don't worry, I'll have the invoices sent directly to your office." The words landed heavy and sharp. Daniel flinched as if struck, his bravado collapsing in front of everyone who had once admired him. Robert stepped forward, pulling the door wide open. The chill of winter swept in, carrying with it the scent of pine and the distant hum of carolers on the street. I paused, looking back, not at Daniel, not at my parents, but toward the kitchen. There, the catering staff worked quietly, heads down, gathering plates and glasses. They had done their jobs without complaint the way I once had. I leaned slightly toward Robert and spoke softly enough for only him to hear. Make sure they all receive a generous bonus. Real work deserves real recognition. He inclined his head. Of course, madam. I turned back to the room. My eyes traveled slowly, meeting each face. The ones who had laughed, the ones who had looked away, the ones who had pitied me. Now not one could hold my gaze. Their expressions had shifted to something else entirely: regret, shame, unease. Even Reverend Miller, who only an hour earlier had lectured on unity, sat with his hands clasped tightly, unable to say a word. I walked forward, the click of my heels punctuating the silence. Each step seemed to close a door, shutting away the years I had spent bending under their weight. When I reached the threshold, I stopped. The air outside was sharp and cold, but it carried freedom with it. I glanced once more over my shoulder. Remember this, I said, my voice low but steady. When you laughed, when you dismissed me, when you thought I would always stay small, that was the moment you lost me. And that loss is forever. No one answered. Not even my mother. I stepped outside. The night air wrapped around me, crisp against my cheeks. The path to the car stretched ahead, lined with snow and glowing under the soft light of the decorations still strung across the neighborhood. Behind me, the house I had once called home seemed smaller, its windows dark silhouettes against the sky. Linda Brown stood near the porch, her phone glowing in her hand. I caught the faint flash of a video clip as she typed quickly. Her face turned toward me, eyes wide. She knew the story was already spreading. The clip she had posted earlier was moving faster than wildfire. By morning, every neighbor, every friend, every business partner would know exactly what had unfolded inside that house tonight. I didn't flinch. Let it spread. Truth had waited long enough. Robert held the SUV door open. I slid into the leather seat, the warmth of the car wrapping around me instantly. He closed the door gently, then got behind the wheel. Madam, he said simply the word, carrying a weight it had never needed to before. As we pulled away, I looked out the window. The Christmas lights, blurred into streaks of red and gold. Families still gathered in their living rooms, singing, eating, laughing. And there behind me, my family sat in silence, their illusions torn apart. Minutes later, the SUV turned toward Teterboro Airport. The runway lights glimmered in the distance, guiding us forward. My jet waited sleek and ready, its engines humming softly like a promise of freedom. I stepped out, the cold wind rushing past. Robert walked a step behind, but the night belonged to me. I climbed the stairs, pausing at the top to glance back once more. Newark's glow stretched faint on the horizon, the lights of my family's house lost somewhere in the sprawl. I spoke softly, almost to myself, but I knew Robert heard. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't shouting for the world to hear. It's leaving in silence and letting them see for themselves just how wrong they were. With that, I entered the jet. The door closed behind me. Outside, the lights of Christmas receded into the distance, smaller and...
We'll all live together. It's perfect, Marcus announced, leaning against our kitchen counter with a self-satisfied smile. No messy divorce, no legal hassles, no property division. Just one big happy arrangement. I continued chopping carrots, my knife hitting the cutting board with precise, steady strokes. My name is Julia, and at 35, I was listening to my husband of 8 years explain why his 24-year-old girlfriend should move into our house. Olivia's lease is up next week, he continued, mistaking my silence for acceptance. She's young fun, she'll bring some excitement into our lives. You've been so focused on your writing lately, this could be good for all of us. The knife paused mid-chop. I looked up at Marcus, taking in his expensive new haircut. The designer watch Olivia had helped him pick out, the eager gleam in his eyes. And where exactly will Olivia be sleeping? I asked, my voice steady. He shifted uncomfortably. Well, I thought, maybe we could convert your study into a room. For now. Of course, my study. The space where I'd spent the last 3 years writing my mystery novels. The ones Marcus dismissed as a hobby even though they paid for his new car. For now, I echoed, resuming my chopping. You know what I mean, Jules. We'll figure it out as we go. The important thing is keeping things Unofficial. No lawyers, no paperwork, just adults making adult decisions. I scraped the carrots into the pot, watching them splash into the simmering broth. Sounds perfect, I said quietly. Marcus blinked, clearly thrown by my easy agreement. Really? I mean, yes, of course it does. I knew you'd understand. When does she arrive? Tomorrow afternoon. I'll help her move her things in while you're at your writing group. I nodded, adding a pinch of thyme to the pot. Perfect timing. He stood there for a moment, waiting for the argument that wouldn't come. Finally, he pushed off from the counter. Right, well, I should call Olivia. Let her know everything's set. After he left, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my sister Anna. It's happening, just like we thought. Her response was immediate. Everything ready? Almost. Need one more day. I'd seen this coming for months. The late nights at the office, the new clothes, the sudden interest in social media. Marcus wasn't exactly subtle. 2 months ago, I'd found a receipt for dinner at La Petite Bistro. Definitely not from a business meeting, since Marcus hated French food. That's when I started preparing. The next morning, I left for my writing group as usual. Marcus barely looked up from his phone as I headed out, too busy texting Olivia about their grand plans. He didn't notice the extra bag I carried or the fact that I'd worn my comfortable walking shoes instead of my usual heels. I drove to the coffee shop where my writing group met every Thursday, parked my car, and waited. At exactly 2:15 p.m., Anna pulled up beside me. Ready? She asked as I climbed into her car. More than ready. We drove past our house at 3:00 p.m., just in time to see Marcus helping a young blonde carry boxes through our front door. Olivia was exactly as I'd imagined. Pretty in that obvious way that made me feel simultaneously old and relieved. Nice shoes, Anna commented dryly, noting Olivia's impractical heels. Those'll look great when she's taking out the trash. If she stays long enough to learn where the trash goes, I replied. We drove to the modest apartment building across town where I signed a lease last week. Everything was already set up, furniture delivered, utilities connected, kitchen stocked. I'd been planning this move for weeks, ever since I'd overheard Marcus on the phone with Olivia, plotting their perfect solution. You're sure about this? Anna asked as she helped me carry in the last of my bags. I looked around the sunny apartment, at the desk positioned perfectly by the window where I could write, at the peaceful silence that wouldn't be interrupted by Marcus's complaints or Olivia's giggles. Absolutely sure. What time will they figure it out? I checked my watch, probably around dinner time when they realize I'm not coming back to cook for them. Anna laughed. And the best part? I pulled out my phone, opening the email I'd received that morning. My new book deal. The advance is enough to buy Marcus out of the house, which he won't know until my lawyer contacts him tomorrow. And since he's so against legal hassles, he'll have to explain to Olivia why their perfect arrangement suddenly involves moving out. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Where are you? Thought you'd be home by now. I typed back, making adult decisions. You understand. Then I turned off my phone, poured 2 glasses of wine, and sat down with my sister to wait for the chaos we knew would come. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a big confrontation. It's simply letting people face the consequences of their own brilliant plans. To new beginnings, Anna said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers. And to perfect arrangements. Outside, the sun was setting on one chapter of my life, but I wasn't afraid of the dark. After all, I wrote mysteries for a living. I knew all about plotting the perfect twist ending. The first signs of Marcus's panic arrived around 7 p.m., when Anna and I were halfway through our takeout dinner. My phone, now turned back on, lit up with a barrage of messages. Jules, where are you? This isn't funny. We need to talk about this like adults. Answer your fate only. The last one made me smile. Marcus had always hated being ignored. It threatened his carefully constructed image of control. I could picture him pacing our kitchen, his kitchen now, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair while Olivia perched uncertainly on one of our bar stools. Should I reply? I asked Anna, showing her the messages. She shook her head, taking another bite of pad thai. Let him stew. He wanted an arrangement without legal hassles. Well, this is about as unofficial as it gets. I had just muted my phone when someone knocked on my apartment door. Anna and I exchanged glances. We weren't expecting anyone, and only 3 people knew where I was. Through the peephole, I saw Marcus's mother, Helen, standing in the hallway. "Did you tell her where you were?" Anna whispered. "No, but she's friends with my real estate agent." I took a deep breath and opened the door. Helen burst in, her designer handbag swinging wildly. "Julia, what is going on? Marcus just called me in a complete state, saying you've disappeared. And then I hear from Susan that you've rented an apartment. This is madness." I gestured for her to sit down. "Would you like some pad thai?" "Pad? No, I don't want pad thai. I want to know why my son is at your house with some child, and you're here eating takeout like nothing's wrong." "Nothing is wrong," I said calmly. "Marcus wanted an informal living arrangement. I'm simply accommodating his wishes." Helen sank onto my new couch, her face cycling through confusion, anger, and something that looked suspiciously like admiration. "He told me about his ridiculous plan this morning. I told him he was being a fool, that no self-respecting woman would agree to such a thing." "He's right about one thing," I said, sitting across from her. "We don't need legal hassles. The house is in my name. My first book advance paid the down payment. The car he's so proud of, bought with my hobby money. Tomorrow, my lawyer will contact him with a very simple proposition. Take a fair cash settlement and leave, or we can make things very official very fast." Helen was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she opened her handbag and pulled out a small silver flask. "I knew I liked you for a reason," she said, taking a delicate sip. "Marcus gets this from his father, you know. The entitlement, the magical thinking." "When did you start planning this?" 2 months ago, when I found the dinner receipt. I knew Marcus, he'd want to have his cake and eat it too. So I started moving money, making arrangements. The new book deal was just perfect timing. And the girl, Olivia, has no idea she's about to become homeless again. I doubt Marcus mentioned that part of his perfect plan. Helen took another sip from her flask, then held it out to me. "You know, when Marcus first brought you home, I thought you were too quiet, too agreeable. I see now you were just watching, waiting, planning." I accepted the flask, feeling the smooth metal against my palm. "I write mysteries, Helen. I know all about misdirection." My phone buzzed again. Marcus had switched to email. "Julia, you're being ridiculous. Come home and we can discuss this like rational people. Olivia is very upset. This isn't the way adults handle things." Helen read the email over my shoulder and snorted. "Rational people?" Coming from my son, who thought moving his mistress into his marital home was a sound decision. Should I respond? I asked, enjoying this newfound alliance with my mother-in-law. "Oh yes," Helen said, a wicked gleam in her eye. "Let's help Marcus understand exactly how adults handle things." I typed out a reply. "Dear Marcus, I agree completely. Adults handle things properly. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow with a settlement offer. Since you're against legal complications, I'm sure you'll appreciate the simplicity of the arrangement. Please ensure Olivia takes her shoes off when walking on my hardwood floors. Best regards, Julia." "Send it," Helen commanded, and I did. The response was immediate. My phone started ringing. Marcus's face flashed on the screen, but I declined the call. "He'll go to your writing group next Thursday," Helen predicted. "He'll expect to find you there, to charm you back." "The group meets at a different coffee shop now," I said. They were quite understanding when I explained the situation. Anna, who had been quietly watching this exchange, finally spoke up. "You know what the best part is? When Marcus tells this story later, he'll have to admit that his wife outsmarted him while he was busy playing house with his girlfriend." Helen stood up, straightening her designer suit. "Julia, dear, I'll handle damage control with the family. Just keep me updated." This is the most entertainment I've had since Marcus's father tried to convince me that his secretary was just helping him organize late-night meetings. After Helen left, Anna and I sat in comfortable silence, the remains of our dinner spread before us. My phone had gone quiet. Perhaps Marcus was finally realizing that his perfect arrangement had backfired spectacularly. "What do you think they're doing right now?" Anna wondered. I glanced at the clock. 8:30 p.m., probably realizing that neither of them knows how to cook. The housekeeper doesn't come until Tuesday, and all the takeout menus were in my desk drawer. The desk drawer in your study. The one Olivia's boxes are probably blocking right now. We both burst out laughing, the kind of deep, cleansing laughter that makes everything feel lighter. Outside, the city lights twinkled, and I felt a profound sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now I was exactly where I needed to be. My phone lit up with one final message from Marcus. "This isn't over." I smiled, thinking of the settlement papers being delivered to his office first thing tomorrow morning. "No," I murmured, "it's just beginning." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside my new apartment window instead of Marcus's daily complaints about his coffee not being strong enough. The peace was interrupted by an urgent call from my lawyer, David. "The papers have been delivered," he reported. "You should expect some resistance." Right on cue, my phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. I declined it, putting my phone on silent as I started my morning writing routine. The words flowed easily. Amazing how creative you can be when you're not managing someone else's emotional weather. Around noon, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Olivia standing there, looking considerably less polished than she had yesterday. I opened the door. "Julia," she said, her voice shaking. "We need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe. "About what?" "Marcus, he didn't tell me the house was yours. He said everything was joint property, that it wouldn't be complicated." She twisted her hands together. "Now he's saying we have to leave by the end of the month. Sounds like you and Marcus have a lot to discuss." "Please," he said. "I gave up my apartment. I don't have anywhere else to go." I felt a flicker of pity, quickly replaced by resolve. "That's funny. Yesterday you were quite happy to take my home. Now you're worried about not having one." She flushed. "It wasn't like that. Marcus said you were okay with it, that you understood modern relationships, and you believed him. A man willing to move his girlfriend into his wife's house without any legal protection." I shook my head. "Think carefully about what that says about his character." The realization dawned slowly on her face. He said the same thing about my apartment lease. That we didn't need paperwork, that it was better to keep things simple. "Let me guess, he suggested you give up your lease before discussing any of this with me?" She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Olivia," I said, softening slightly, "take some free advice from someone who writes about manipulative characters for a living. People who avoid legal hassles are usually the ones you need legal protection from." After she left, I called Helen. "You'll never guess who just visited," I began. "Oh, I can guess," Helen replied. "Marcus called me this morning, ranting about how unreasonable you're being. I told him he's lucky you're offering a settlement at all. By the way, have you checked your email?" I opened my laptop to find an email from my publisher. The early reviews for my new book were in, and they were glowing. One line caught my eye: "A masterful tale of deception and justice served cold." If they only knew. Later that afternoon, David called again. "Marcus has agreed to the settlement," he said, though he did try to argue that his emotional investment in the house should count for something. I laughed. The same emotional investment he was willing to share with Olivia. "Exactly. He's signing the papers tomorrow. The money will be transferred directly to his account, and he has 30 days to vacate the property." And Olivia? Not mentioned in any of the legal documents, interestingly enough. That evening, Anna came over with champagne. We stood on my small balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "You know what I love most about this?" Anna said, filling our glasses. "You gave him exactly what he wanted. No legal hassles, no messy divorce. Just a simple property transaction. Sometimes the best revenge is simply turning someone's words against them." I replied, thinking of all the times Marcus had dismissed my writing as mere stories. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "Dinner next Sunday. I want to hear all about your new book." I smiled, showing the message to Anna, who knew my happy ending would include my mother-in-law. "Soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law," Anna corrected. "No," I said, thinking of Helen's quiet strength during her own divorce years ago. Some family ties are chosen, not given. A week later, I drove past my old house and saw Marcus and Olivia arguing on the front lawn, moving boxes scattered around them. Through my open window, I caught snippets of their conversation, something about broken promises and trust. I didn't slow down. Their story wasn't mine anymore. Back in my apartment, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. My cursor blinked at the top of a fresh page as I typed. Chapter 1. Sometimes the perfect crime isn't taking something that doesn't belong to you. It's simply letting go of what does. My phone buzzed one last time with a message from Marcus. I hope you're happy with yourself. I looked around my peaceful apartment at the life I'd built from the ashes of his betrayal and typed back, I am, thank you for asking. Then I turned back to my novel, ready to write my own story on my own terms in my own home. After all, isn't that what happy endings are really about? Some people might call what I did revenge. I prefer to think of it as poetic justice, served without legal hassles, just as Marcus wanted. Sometimes the best plot twists are the ones we write for ourselves.